zone, a monster tide. An artificial wave of monsters far beyond the difficulty level of this entire exam. With my abilities, escaping right now would have been easy. All I had to do was hide, and none of these monsters would be able to find me easily. But the real problem was that if this monster tide truly destroyed the outer camp and caused massive casualties among the participants, then this national ability exam watched by the entire country would most likely be suspended, or even canceled entirely. And if that happened, then all my plans, personally crushing Josie in front of everyone, taking first place, and obtaining that third-tier energy core would all be ruined by the Joe family. In that case, I had even more reason not to let this monster tide continue. My path, no one was allowed to block it. Not the Joe family, and certainly not these beasts. So instead of retreating, I faced the incoming monster wave head-on. Meanwhile, outside Wilderness Area 7, Zone C had already fallen into complete chaos. Suzu was leading dozens of students as they desperately defended their line. She continuously raised walls of ice that barely managed to stop the first wave of horn wolves and iron-skinned pigs. But cracks rapidly spread across those frozen walls as the monsters outside slammed into them like mad beasts, clawing and smashing nonstop. The students behind the barrier had already turned deathly pale, and it was obvious they were close to breaking mentally. Some were crying while screaming, "What are we supposed to do?" Others panicked and mentioned Josie. Doesn't he always brag about being strong? Then where the hell is he now? Suddenly one girl shouted through tears, "Stop relying on him already. Earlier, when the Hornwolves attacked, he pushed Liming in front of him as a shield and ran away first." Those words completely destroyed the last bit of hope everyone still had. Josie, that arrogant rich kid who always acted superior and constantly tried to impress Suzu. When death truly arrived, the first thing he thought about was sacrificing a classmate just to save himself. Suzu's face twisted with shock and fury, but she no longer had time to curse him because the next wave of monsters was already crashing toward them. Seeing that the ice wall was about to shatter completely, she gritted her teeth and forcefully released every bit of remaining power inside her body. She pressed both hands onto the ground and unleashed her Area of Effect trump card. Ice Age. In an instant, a freezing current exploded outward, and the entire 100-meter area ahead was swallowed by icy mist and frost. More than 10 Tier 1 monsters charging toward them instantly became frozen ice statues. For a moment, she successfully stopped the situation, but a skill at that level was still far too much for her current strength. The second she finished using it, blood suddenly rushed into her throat. She dropped to one knee as the color drained completely from her face. Almost all the power inside her body had been exhausted. And unfortunately, at the exact moment she weakened. Boom! The ground in front of them suddenly exploded as dirt and shattered rocks blasted into the sky. Then a monster over 15 meters long, covered in thick black armor and resembling a gigantic ancient crocodile with a massive horn on its head, crawled out from underground. A terrifying beast had appeared. A Tier 3 leader class monster, the Iron-Armored Earth Dragon. The moment it emerged, despair instantly filled the faces of every student because this was not a creature that should ever appear in a high school senior exam, much less an enemy. These exhausted students, who were already barely surviving against Tier 1 monsters, could possibly fight. Suzu understood that better than anyone. The power in her body was completely gone, and she had become so weak that she couldn't even lift her fingers anymore. So all she could do was watch helplessly as the Iron-Armored Earth Dragon lowered its gigantic head, opened its mouth filled with razor-sharp fangs, and lunged directly toward her with terrifying force. The foul, rotten breath slammed directly into Suzu's face. Death was already right in front of her. In complete despair, she slowly closed her eyes. And at that exact moment, swoosh! A black meteor suddenly tore through the dark forest sky from above the towering trees hundreds of meters high. In a way that completely defied the laws of physics, it descended fearlessly toward the ground. Boom! A deafening impact shook the earth once again. That black shadow crashed down like a meteorite only half a meter in front of Suzu. Violent wind pressure and shattered earth exploded outward from the impact, even forcing the gigantic head of the Iron-Armored Earth Dragon to recoil slightly. Suzu's eyes snapped open in shock. What she saw was a back. A back that wasn't even broad or imposing, yet somehow felt capable of carrying the entire sky. A faded backpack hung over my shoulders, still stained from countless battles. I simply stood there silently, and beneath my feet was a terrifying crater half a meter deep. Right beside my feet was the enormous mouth of the Iron-Armored Earth Dragon, filled with razor-sharp fangs, less than an inch away from me. Time itself seemed to freeze at that moment. Violent wind blew through my hair while I still held the standard alloy combat knife I had taken from the dead Hina captain. My back wasn't muscular, but at that moment, it felt like a mountain standing firmly between Suzu and the Tier 3 leader class monster, completely blocking the bloody disaster behind me. Suzu froze for a second before her expression suddenly changed. She screamed at me, "Lin, are you insane? Run! That's a Tier 3 leader class monster. Even armor-piercing bullets can't penetrate its defense. You'll die." But I didn't even turn around. The iron-armored Earth Dragon had obviously become completely enraged. It released a monstrous roar so loud that several nearby students fainted instantly from the shockwave alone. Then its gigantic tail covered in bone spikes whipped through the air like an enormous steel whip. Everywhere it passed, giant trees and massive rocks exploded one after another. The destructive force behind it was terrifying. If I faced that attack head-on, I would definitely lose. But if I retreated, then everyone behind me would die. In that instant, my mind made its decision. My 1 cubic meter storage space wasn't large enough to contain the entire head of this giant monster, and ordinary attacks would barely have any effect against it. If I wanted to kill it, I had to strike its weakest point directly. I had to hit the weakness perfectly. So the moment the steel whip tail was about to smash into me, my waist suddenly bent backward at an almost impossible angle. The attack barely grazed the tip of my nose as I dodged it by a hair's breadth. Then instead of retreating, I used that exact position and the force in my legs to launch my entire body forward like a cannon shell straight toward the iron-armored Earth Dragon. Suzu's face instantly turned pale from what she saw. In her eyes, this wasn't fighting anymore. This was suicide. And just as expected, the moment the armored Earth Dragon realized its attack had missed, it immediately raised one of its gigantic claws, each one the size of a small truck, and slammed it downward toward my head. But the moment the massive shadow completely swallowed me, I suddenly lowered my charging body. Using an extreme slide tackle, I barely slipped through the tiny gap beneath the descending claw and rushed directly under the monster's stomach. Boom! The gigantic claw smashed into the ground and instantly created a deep crater. Through the gaps between her trembling fingers, Suzu saw everything clearly, and she froze in disbelief. Of course, she knew that the stomach was one of the slightly weaker parts of the armored Earth Dragon, but only slightly. The scales there were still unbelievably thick. Ordinary attacks couldn't penetrate them at all. But from the very beginning, I never planned to destroy its armor. Underneath the monster's belly, the space was narrow and suffocating. Foul-smelling sticky liquid mixed with mud dripped endlessly around me. I stabilized my footing and casually threw away the now useless alloy knife. Then I slowly raised my head and focused my senses entirely on the powerful heartbeat thundering inside the monster's body. In the next second, I slowly raised both hands and pressed them against the cold, hard scales. It wasn't a slash. It wasn't even gathering strength. It looked almost ridiculous, like I was simply touching it lightly. Then, buzz. A ripple in space instantly passed through the scales and opened directly inside the chest cavity of the armored Earth Dragon itself. At that moment, my eyes were as cold as a final judgment. For me, crush. The 1 cubic meter space of pure darkness perfectly enveloped the monster's heart. A heart as large as a small car, and then violently closed. A deep and muffled tearing sound echoed from inside its body. The deafening roar of the armored Earth Dragon suddenly stopped. Its enormous body froze completely in place. The brutality and madness inside its blood-red eyes rapidly faded away, leaving behind only confusion and instinctive fear. Even though there wasn't a single visible wound on the outside of its body, the monster clearly felt it. The source of all its strength had suddenly disappeared. I immediately used that opportunity to escape from beneath its stomach without even looking back. 2 seconds later, boom! The gigantic armored body, as massive as a mountain, finally lost all support and collapsed heavily onto the ground, shaking the entire land. Amid the smoke and dust, Suzu stared blankly at the monster. There wasn't even a visible injury on its body. Yet the third-rank commander-class beast was completely dead. It was as if its soul had vanished. Her Ice Age attack couldn't even stop it for a moment. Yet the person everyone mocked as worthless, had killed it with a single touch. This was no longer just a difference in strength. It was something she simply couldn't understand. Meanwhile, I calmly walked toward the corpse. With a single thought, a gigantic heart as large as a tire and smooth as glass dropped into the mud. Expressionlessly, I reached inside and quickly pulled out a fist-sized diamond-shaped crystal. It was pitch black, and inside it looked as if lava was flowing endlessly. The third-rank commander-level Earth Dragon crystal core. Finally, Suzu regained a bit of her senses. Her voice came out hoarse as she asked, "Lin, what exactly are you?" But I only glanced at her coldly and replied, "Don't block my path." Those words instantly cut off every question she still had. After that, I grabbed the sharp horn of the armored Earth Dragon, took a deep breath, and forcefully dragged the gigantic several-ton monster forward. Step by step, I walked toward the training camp. My back wasn't large at all, yet I was dragging a mountain-like corpse through the dark forest and the endless corpses of monsters. The scene looked less like a human and more like a god, or a demon descending upon the earth. Suzu stood there completely stunned as she watched me disappear into the distance. And when she remembered how Josie had abandoned his classmates just to save himself, the disgust and hatred inside her reached their absolute limit. Meanwhile, my figure became permanently engraved into her mind. At the same time, chaos had already consumed the temporary camp in Wilderness Area Number 7. The outer defenses were on the verge of complete collapse as soldiers desperately organized the retreat of the students. Inside the command post, the colonel stared grimly at the massive red clusters rapidly approaching on the radar. The colonel's face had already turned dark with rage as he furiously shouted at the intelligence department, demanding an explanation for the monster tide. But suddenly, Josie stumbled into the command center looking completely miserable before collapsing onto the floor. Crying loudly, he shouted, "Sir, I know how the monster attack started. Lin did it. That worthless E-class caused all of this." The colonel frowned heavily and ordered him to explain properly. So Josie immediately twisted the entire story. He claimed that I had somehow obtained highly concentrated monster-attracting incense and deliberately scattered it throughout the wilderness. According to him, I had even threatened to drag everyone down with me. In simple terms, he wanted to use the opportunity, thinking I had already died in the monster tide, to throw all the blame onto me while making himself look like the heroic truth-teller. Seeing the colonel's expression grow uglier and uglier, Josie secretly felt delighted and prepared to push the situation even further. But before he could continue, heavy footsteps suddenly echoed from the entrance of the camp. Boom, boom, boom. Every single step shook the ground as if it was stomping directly on everyone's chest. The thick fog quickly parted, and under the stunned gazes of the entire camp, I slowly walked forward while dragging the mountain-like corpse of the Third Order commander, the iron-armored Earth Dragon, with only one hand. My body was covered in mud, my face expressionless, and I looked like some demonic god that had just crawled out of purgatory itself. I completely ignored everyone staring at me and walked straight toward Josie before throwing the tactical backpack of the Hina squad at his feet, along with the crushed communicator I had shattered earlier. Both objects slammed onto the ground like garbage. Then I looked at him coldly and spoke, "The Joe family needs to explain something to me. Are these yours?" Instantly, the entire camp fell into deadly silence. It felt as if every sound in the world had suddenly disappeared. The grief-filled expression on Josie's face froze completely before turning into overwhelming terror. His face turned pale like a ghost as he blurted out, "You're alive?" The moment he said it, he realized too late that he had practically admitted everything himself. I didn't even bother looking at him again. Instead, I kicked the backpack open. A half-burned incense stick, the dog tags of the Hina squad captain, and the still flickering communicator rolled out onto the ground. Then I calmly pressed the play button. Immediately, Zhou Shang's dark and hurried voice echoed throughout the entire camp from the communicator speakers. "Just throw it toward him, and every second-order monster within the area will gather there. Once that happens, not even his bones will remain. The military will just declare it an accident." Solid evidence. In an instant, the crowd exploded with rage. The Zhou family really hired killers? They were even planning to sacrifice all of us? You animals! The colonel's expression became terrifyingly cold, but even then, Josie still refused to give up. He collapsed onto the ground and screamed hysterically, "How could an E-class possibly defeat the Hina squad? How could he drag back the corpse of a Third Order Earth Dragon? This entire thing is fake. It's all staged." Hearing that, I finally revealed a cold smile. "E-class?" I slowly raised my hand and revealed a mud-covered student monitoring bracelet. "So what you mean is, an E-class student just happened to conveniently discover all the evidence of your crimes?" In the next second, I forcefully hacked the bracelet's access permissions, and a video immediately appeared on the giant screen inside the command center. In the footage, a horn wolf suddenly attacked the group. Instead of helping, Josie violently shoved Liming toward the monster as a human shield while he himself ran away without even looking back. The final frame zoomed directly onto his face, a face filled with excitement and madness. If the audio recording had only made the crowd furious, this video completely ignited their desire to kill him. "Josie, give my brother's life back. Trash like you doesn't deserve to live." Right at that moment, Suzu arrived while being supported by several girls. Her face was pale, but she still forced herself to stand and testify before everyone. "I can prove it. Josie abandoned his classmates to save himself, and Lin was the one who saved all of us." With testimony from an S-class genius, Josie's final struggle completely collapsed. The colonel took a deep breath before suddenly turning around and issuing an order to the law enforcement team. "Arrest Josie immediately, detain him, and transfer him to military court for the highest level of trial."
Follow, like, comment, and share for part 6.